Hey everyone! In this video, I'm going to show you how to protect a web application running on a Liberty server with IBM Cloud App ID. So just to recap, App ID is a service that allows you to connect your applications with different identity providers and easily add user authentication into your application. So specifically today, we're going to be talking about the authorization code workflow and auth2 workflow called authorization code. And with this workflow, if you recall the introduction video to the series, with this workflow, whenever user is trying to access the application server, in this case web application, the application server will actually detect that user has not authenticated yet, and it will redirect user to the authorization server, app ID. App ID will present a login form or consent form. Authorization servers do that, and user will be able to authenticate with authorization server. And once user is authenticated with authorization server, the user will be redirected back to the application. At this point, application will retrieve tokens using the grant code it received from authorization server, and user will be presented with the application. Now, this workflow looks complex, but it's important to remember that this part, in this case, will be fully handled by the Liberty OIDC client, which we will configure in a moment. Okay, so besides looking through the workflow, the token here will be returned in the JWT format, JOT format, right? And I will show you how to examine the content of that token, how to actually retrieve all the information available from that token in your application, things like, for example, scopes or name or any other properties that you might need to make business decisions. So summarizing this intro, right, if you recall this four-step process of authenticating with your application users in your applications and then making a request to protected resources, today we're going to be talking about the left part in context of Liberty web application. Okay, so we'll implement the user authentication using the authorization code, auth2 OIDC authorization code workflow. And then in the application itself, the tokens will be validated. This will be done by the OIDC client available built in the Liberty, right? And we will also read claims to retrieve the information about user. Okay, so without further ado, let's actually start. So the first thing you will need to do is to configure your Liberty server, right? So in your server XML, you will need to specify at least these four features, and I will make the sample available for download for everyone, right? So you can actually take a closer look, right? You will need those four features enabled. Okay, now know that some of these features might necessarily come built in with Liberty out of the box, and you will need to install them, right? So if you do not have one of those features in your Liberty, whenever you're gonna start the server, you will get an error saying this feature is not currently installed, but you can definitely do it by running, for example, uh, install utility and the name of your server. So in my case, it's default server, right? Install default server. Okay, so it will just install all the features you have defined in your server XML. Now, the next section is defining the SSL that we will use to connect to App ID. So this is the requirement of OpenID Connect client that comes with Liberty, right? This one, OpenID Connect client, and essentially it requires you have some kind of a default key store reference and also a trust store reference. So since at the moment App ID TLS is provided by DigiCert, right? I actually took some time to export the DigiCert root certificate as JKS file, right, from App ID, and I've bundled it with this sample application. Okay, so you can just use it out of the box, but do remember that in case the certificate changes, you might need to retrieve the new certificate from the App ID server. Right. So regarding this password, whenever you create a Liberty server, the default key store will be generated and the password will be new every single time. Okay. So in order to see what the password is, right, you can actually take a look at the user server's default server, right? Not. And here you will see a file called server.env, right? So if you look into that file, you will see a key store password property. So this is the default password for your key store, right? And you can definitely take it and copy into your server XML file. So I actually have a different password. I'm not using the default. I'm using a different password. That's why they're different. Okay, so let me clear that and let me get back to the bin folder. That's what I need. Okay, excellent. Cool, so let's see what exactly we need to configure next. So the next part is actually configuring the OpenID Connect client itself, right? So first of all, you need to give it some kind of a name. I'm giving it the name OIDC Client Simple Liberty Web Application, okay? Then you need to specify properties of your OpenID Connect or Auth2 server, client ID, client secret, discover endpoint URL. We will copy them momentarily. You need to specify the token endpoint authentication method. In case of FID, that's basic. Signature algorithm, the redirect URL you want to use for your application. Since I will be running my application on localhost, that's going to be localhost 9080, right? HTTPS required false. So I've set this property to false because I will be running this application on localhost and I do not have HTTPS set up for my localhost. So I'm going to be using HTTP, right? But please do remember whenever you deploy your applications to production or even, development and staging servers, always use HTTPS, right? So this one is basically only because I'm running this application locally. And you need to specify the reference to SSL that we've previously defined, right? That's the OIDC client SSL. That's the SSL that we've set up right here, okay? So I will now I need to populate those three properties. So in order to do that, I've already have app ID instance provisioned on IBM Cloud. So I will go to applications and here in the applications, right, I already have my Simple Liberty web application. I'm going to click view credentials and I'm going to copy a few of those credentials. So first of all, I need client ID. I will put client ID here. I need secret, right? That's going to be the secret uh, OIDC client is going to use, and I need a discovery endpoint. So I'm copying discovery endpoint, right? So all the information about different endpoints will be retrieved from this discovery endpoint. Okay, so my OIDC client is configured. Okay, what's next? So next I have the definition of my application that I will build using Maven in IDE, right? And here I'm just specifying the location to that application, right? I called it Simple Liberty Web Application, and it's under my development folder. This section is important, okay? Essentially in this section, right, I've defined a security role that my application will use. So in order for OIDC client to actually be able to protect your application, to enforce protection in your application, you need to define a security role that the application will be using. Okay, so and I've used a very simple approach here. I've defined a security role called my role, and it will apply to all authenticated users. Okay, so not overcomplicate. I did not overcomplicate it. Made it very, very simple. So this is a bare minimum setup that you need to make sure you can protect your web applications. Okay, and now let's actually do server run. Okay, let's start the server. Okay, so the server has started, right? I don't see any errors. Okay, which means we're good. Okay, now that my Liberty server is running, let's look at the IDE, right? And let's see what exactly we have in the application. So this is a simple web application, right? If you look under web app, there is a single index HTML file, right? Currently just saying hello from the app. I do have more code I will uncomment and gradually as we go. Okay, but for now it's just a simple HTML file that I can see right, the moment I build it. So I clicked build. Okay, you can see that application was updated, right? We might want to look into web XML because this is important. Besides defining, the usual things like display name, and you might have additional servlets here or whatever you have in your application. I actually do need to define a security role, and keep in mind note here that I'm actually using the same role name as I've defined in my server XML, right? If you remember, I've defined the same role name right over here. Okay, and then I'm creating some security constraints, right? So note that all my security constraints, the protected area, all the patterns are currently commented out, and that's because I want to start this application without any protection and then gradually add authentication capabilities into that application. So under my authentication constraints, I do have the role name, my role, okay, which kind of connects everything together. So let's start simple. Let's see if this works, right? Application is running. So let's try running it. Okay, and that's the application, localhost 9080, simple Liberty web application. You can see that it does exactly what expected to. Hello from the app, right? And that's the text we're seeing here. So let's start protecting this application, right? As the first step, I want to make sure that the whole application is protected. So I'm going to uncomment this URL pattern. I'm basically going to say that I want the whole thing to be protected, right? I rebuild my application. Okay, I'm using Maven here. This is a Maven application, so I'm just doing a Maven clean install. Okay, and if I go to my application and refresh it, right, you will actually see error message saying invalid redirect URI, right? So this is expected, right? We see it because currently this application is still not registered with, to be specific, the redirect URI is still not registered with app ID, right? And if you recall the workflow, right, after a successful authentication, authorization server, app ID returns you back to the application server, to your web application. So in order for this step to work, okay, you need to whitelist your application server URL. Basically, register it, tell app ID that this URL is trusted. Why? Well, because the grant code is returned here, right? And we want to make sure that only authorized servers, right, the URLs that you authorize can be used for this redirect back to the application. So the solution is pretty easy. We will go to app ID dashboard, and under authentication settings, I will just do localhost 9080. I will use a wildcard for simplicity, right? In production environments, right? I would not recommend using wildcard, just use the full URL, right? And especially not localhost, right? Okay, so I'm going back here, I'm refreshing, and now I can actually see the login screen. Okay, so I'm already logged in with Facebook. Okay, so you will not see the screen saying you need to log in, but I will click login with Facebook. Okay, and I'm taken back to the application. So now I'm actually logged in within my application. Okay, I had to authenticate, and now I'm back in the application. Now, the problem here is that even though I'm logged in, I'm not seeing any indication about the fact that I'm logged in, right? So, how about displaying my name or having a logout button, right? So let's see how do we add this functionality. Let's get back to our index.html file. Okay, and let's uncomment this section. Right, so first of all, we have a header here with ID of user, and I'll try to populate this header with the name of the user. Okay, so in order to do this, I will uncomment two additional sections, right, of my HTML. So the login button is supposed to take me to login. The logout button is supposed to take me to /logout, right? And whenever the application is going to start, this page is going to load, right? A request to get /API/user will be made, okay? And if information will be retrieved, right? If this request is going to be successful, the user, right, header, this one, will be populated with hello, the name of that user. Okay, the logout button will be displayed, the login button will be hidden. Okay, so the idea is if this request will be successful, I will see my name, and I will see a logout button, and login button will be hidden. And if this request has failed, I will only see a login button, right? Because it's visible here. Now you will note that I'm invoking this /API/user here, right? So where this is coming from. So this is coming from my code. This is something that I've implemented, right? I've created a server which I called user servlet. okay, and with URL pattern of /API/user. And basically here in my servlet, I'm using Liberty libraries to retrieve information that was obtained during the YDC client workflow. So I'm starting by retrieving a subject, and this is done using WS subject get run as subject. And then from that subject, I'm retrieving private credentials, and from private credentials, I'm getting the ID token, the identity token, right? If you recall, there are two tokens, access and identity. I want to understand who that user is. I want to retrieve user's name, so I'm looking for identity token. In case identity token is not found, right, I will return for a one and with unauthorized response. Okay, otherwise, I will decode the token. I will retrieve user's name from the token, right? Name, and I will return this as a JSON object. So this is a very, very simplistic implementation. There are a bunch of libraries that can make it simpler, but I intentionally made it very, very simplistic to show what exactly is going on. So this is my user servlet, right? A servlet that is supposed to return JSON object with user's name if I'm authenticated. Okay, let's restart the application. Okay, and let's see what's going on now. So I'm refreshing the application, and immediately you can see that it started to work. So now I have a logout button, right? And it says, "Hello, Anton." That is my name. You can see down here that the request to /user was made, right? And here the response is, as expected, a JSON object called a JSON object with my name. Okay, so let's see what happens if I click logout. Okay, now if I'm clicking logout, I'm immediately taken back to the login screen, and this is as expected, right? I can log in again, right? So, and I'm back in the screen, and now I can click logout, and I'm immediately taken back to the login screen. But what if I want to have a part of my application as not protected, right? So at the moment, right, everything is protected. The moment I log out, I don't have an opportunity to do anything else in my application. I have to log in order to see anything, right? And this is basically happening because of this URL pattern definition, right? You remember that currently everything is protected. Okay, so in order to make this experience a little bit more flexible, basically maybe I do want to have landing page that does not require user authentication, I will actually change my URL patterns, right? So instead of saying I want to protect everything, right, with the asterisk, I'm going to say I do want to protect /login, because this is going to be my login trigger. And I do want to protect /API because no one should be able to access /API if they're not authorized. So let's see what happens. Of course, I need to rebuild the application, right? Let's see what happens if I log out now, right? I click the logout button, and now I'm not taken to login immediately. I'm actually in the application screen. I do have the login button. And if you look down here, the request to /API/user was made, but now it is for one unauthorized. And that's essentially exactly what we expect it to be in case I'm unauthenticated, right? Not authenticated, not authorized. So now my application actually has a part that is not protected. I do have a login button. I can click that login button. It will trigger login, right? And the moment I log in, I'm taken back to the application. And now my user /API/user actually returns the information about user. Okay, so this is pretty much the way you protect your Liberty application. A few more things are, first of all, you can see that I do have two more servlets here, login servlet and logout servlet. Login servlet pretty much doesn't do anything. I only need it in order to have to trigger this login functionality, right? Basically, after the login successful, I'm redirecting back to the application root, so this servlet doesn't do a lot. Logout servlet is similar, right? The only thing it does before redirecting back to root is it goes to request.logout. Okay, so this is a servlet API, servlet level, HTTP servlet level API. Basically, this terminates your HTTP session. Okay, so those two are rather simple. Now, the last thing I do want to show is how do you getting to the tokens, okay? So if you look right here, right, you can see that I'm retrieving ID token from private credentials, okay? And you can see that here at the bottom, I'm basically uh, retrieving payload by splitting the token with a as a separator. Okay, what this basically means is ID token object to string. That's your original token, the token that you can actually use and retrieve all the information, right? So using this code, I'm parsing the token. Right, at the end, I'm getting a JSON object with decoded payload object. I'm only using a property called name, right? But if you really want to, let's see if we can return additional data, right? User JSON dot put everything, right? And we'll just do decoded payload object. Okay. So we'll make, I've just added a new property called everything, and the whole object will be there. So I will rebuild my application. And now if I click refresh, right, you go to user and you can see that I do have user. The name is here, but in addition, I have this property called everything, and it literally contains everything available in my ID token. So usually returning everything is not a good idea, but you can return only the properties that you need. Okay. So with this, I think we're done. Okay, it's really simple to protect your Liberty application, and the sample code, the sample application will be available together with video. So till next time.